Throughout history, the southern Kuril Islands weren't actually managed by Japan or Russia. Instead, they belonged to a country called the Emishur. The indigenous people of this region were mainly the Ainu. Japan claims that in 1644, during the Edo shogunate, the Shoho Kunizu maps recorded the islands as being under the control of the Matsumi domain. However, the Russians believe that from the 1760s onward, Russian fishing vessels frequented the southern Kuril Islands more regularly. They even went so far as to include the residents of Iturup and Kunashir, who were Emishur, as Russian nationals. In 1806, the Russian Navy raided Kisarazu Gudan, the administrative and trade center of Japan on Sakhalin Island, laying the groundwork for animosity between the two countries, although these remained localized disputes. By 1855, both nations recognized that continued friction was detrimental to their interests and opted for reconciliation. They enacted the Treaty of Shimoda. The southern Kuril Islands were allocated to Japan, the northern Kuril Islands to Tsarist Russia, and Sakhalin's status was preserved as neutral, not belonging to either side. Clearly, this exchange was viewed unfavorably by Japan, leaving an enduring sentiment of loss at its core. Back in 1860, Russia strong-armed China into recognizing the island of Sakhalin as their territory. Then, Russia shifted their focus to Japan. In 1875, the two countries made a deal in St. Petersburg, which has come to be known as the Treaty of St. Petersburg. Russia proposed a trade. They'd give up all of Sakhalin in exchange for the northern four islands of the Kuril chain. Even though Japan wasn't thrilled with the deal, they weren't in a strong position to refuse, especially given Russia's might at that time. By 1869, Japan had firmly established its control over Hokkaido and set its sights further north, aiming for all of Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands. This was like a geopolitical chess game, with Japan's northern push clashing with Russia's eastern expansion. Fast forward to 1904, after 35 quick years, Japan had grown stronger and found itself in a conflict with Russia, the Russo-Japanese War. The two duked it out in northeast China. Japan made a swift northern move, capturing all of Sakhalin. After a series of battles, Japan came out on top. On September 5, 1905, the two signed the Treaty of Portsmouth, with Russia handing over territory south of the 50th parallel on Sakhalin to Japan. It was Japan's golden moment up north, as they got not only a chunk of Sakhalin but also the entire Kuril Islands chain, including the four northern islands Japan still claims today. The Russo-Japanese War was a local conflict for Russia, but for Japan, it was a war staking its national destiny. If Japan were to ultimately fail, it would likely regress to a state similar to its pre-Meiji Restoration era, thereby forfeiting its chance to become a strong nation. For Russia to triumph over Japan, it was crucial not to lose naval battles. If naval defeat could be avoided, the entirety of the Japanese Navy would be obliterated. Russia's naval power would grow, extending its influence to the ice-free ports of the Far East and potentially even occupying Japanese territory. However, this scenario is challenging to predict in detail due to the alliance between Britain and Japan at that time, which might lead to their intervention. The United States would not favor Russia's success. The exact course of events is hard to determine. Japan emerged victorious in the Russo-Japanese War, not only establishing itself as a major power in East Asia but also marking the first time an Asian country defeated a Western superpower. This victory significantly enhanced Japan's reputation on the international stage. However, the cost of victory was steep. Japan incurred substantial costs, both militarily and economically, which led to it shouldering a massive debt. On the other hand, Russia lost its vital interests in the Far East, especially in Manchuria, during the war. This defeat intensified Russia's internal political crisis. The reign of Nicholas II came under widespread criticism due to this failure, which further propelled the Russian Revolution of 1905. Moreover, after the defeat, there was a shift in Russia's foreign policy, strengthening its ties with Europe, particularly with Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, laying the groundwork for the outbreak of World War I. In essence, the Russo-Japanese War had profound implications for the political landscapes of both East Asia and Europe. On August 22, 1910, Japanese Resident General in Korea, Terachi Masatake, and Korean Prime Minister Lee Won-yong signed the Japan-Korea Annexation Treaty, formally incorporating Korea into Japan's territory. In 1945, as World War II neared its conclusion, the UK and the US urged Stalin to declare war on Japan. To gain Stalin's support, the Western Allies made a series of territorial concessions, including acknowledging the independence of Outer Mongolia and determining the fate of the Kuril Islands and Sakhalin. On August 9, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan, initiating the August Storm Operation. Just a week later, Japan announced its surrender, but the Kuril Islands remained under its control. On August 18, the Soviet Red Army began its military campaign on the Kuril Islands. While listening to their emperor's surrender broadcast on the radio, Japanese forces reached out to the Soviets to broker a ceasefire. But the determined Soviet Red Army persisted, continuing combat for another half-month. The fighting lasted until September 5, resulting in the entire archipelago's occupation by the Soviets. In this military campaign, even with superior numbers and facing an already surrendered Japan, the battle was challenging, with 1,000 Japanese and 1,500 Soviet casualties. Subsequently, the Kuril Islands, including the southernmost islands, became part of the Soviet territory. In 1951, Japan signed the Treaty of San Francisco with Western countries, renouncing territories they had previously occupied, including the Kuril Islands and the southern part of Sakhalin. Japan maintains that since the Treaty of Shimoda in 1855, the southern Kuril Islands have been part of Japanese territory, and thus, the Soviet occupation is illegal. The Soviets offered to return two of the islands, Habomai and Shikotan, to Japan, but Japan was concerned this would signify permanent Soviet control over the remaining islands. The Soviet Union and Japan engaged in prolonged negotiations over the southern Kuril Islands. In 1991, as the Soviet Union neared its dissolution, Gorbachev proposed returning the islands to Japan in exchange for economic aid. However, disagreements over the amount of assistance caused the talks to collapse. Following the Soviet Union's dissolution, Yeltsin indicated a willingness to continue discussing the southern Kuril Islands issue. However, when Putin came to power, he made it clear that the matter was no longer up for debate and fortified the military presence on the islands. Putin's intention to serve consecutive terms suggests there might be no progress on the issue under his leadership. So, the ownership of the southern Kuril Islands remains a gray area. But for now, Russia holds the advantage and seems unlikely to change its stance in the foreseeable future. Please subscribe to my channel on YouTube. Thank you, everyone.